David, I do not know if there is another show on Crowdsource the Truth that is subjected to more technical, purely random technical difficulties than yours. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, and I don't believe in random.
I'm with you. And you and I are experimenting with some new technology today, always trying to improve the show. Actually, not new. This is technology that I use with the bishop. I used it last night with Michael Caine, who joined us from the Teachers Union, and it worked fine. But of course, when your show begins, David, that's when they want the trouble to begin. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at Twitter this morning, David, but I woke up to a very interesting message. Well, of course, I have to log back in. See, it says something's wrong. Anyway, David, it's a nightmare to some extent, but somebody in Oxford tried to log into my Twitter account. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw, and it had the Union Jack on it, I suppose. So the British Empire is down, but it hasn't gone.
What do you think of that, somebody in Oxford trying to log into my Twitter account?
I think that we are all becoming, and that's the gist of today's show, what I've coined a phrase, expert victim witnesses. That is to say, we know something is going on. A few of us can articulate it, I think, and share what we've experienced with a wider group of people. But we're in such a web of complexity, it becomes, we are simultaneously victims of the complexity and we're witnesses to the crime. So it's a real problem, and I sympathize now with almost everyone that I've come into contact in, in particular the last 40 years. Over to you.
Yeah, I want people to take a look at this, David, because it's really, all the guests on Crowdsource the Truth are persistently attacked, but there are individuals in particular who have a great interest in your show, this show, Discovery CSI. So here's the message I received earlier about a suspicious login attempt from Chrome on Windows. I absolutely hate Windows, David. I have it here, but I almost never use it. I'm certainly not in Oxford, England. And I don't know, what do you think about this?
Well, I remember going to Oxford University to take a scholarship in mathematics, and I sat in the wrong hall and took the wrong paper. I did 12 questions in 2 hours, but the college authorities wrote to my headmaster and said that we believe your student is very smart, but he has no common sense and we do not want him at this university.
Oh.
So I went to Cambridge, right? So I have rather a dim view of Oxford. I appreciate there's lots of very bright people, going back to World War II and the double cross operation, but we're going to bring them down, Jason.
Yeah, David, I think that's right, because we're not going to allow them to bring us down. And there's a lot of topics we want to cover today. I'm particularly fascinated, David, by this phenomenon I've been observing where things that you've told us about are playing out right in front of our eyes in the real world. I'm talking about the double cross, the parallel narratives, all the different things that you've been talking about. There was a huge dust up earlier this week, last weekend mostly, over this video of the Benghazi whistleblower. People have seen this guy. I'm trying to locate the video right now. It was on Pure Social, which I've never heard of before. And it causes me to think that it's pure social engineering. But it came up in last night's, presidential town hall. Interesting. So there's now an error when I try to bring that video up, but we'll find it. People are familiar with it. It's the falconer, Alan Parrott. You had a chance to view that video, right, David?
I didn't. I mean, this is obviously a fake character in a fake narrative, but I mean, how dumb do they think we are? A guy called Parrott used to be a falconer for the Arab sheikhs, and now he's talking about scattering body parts over the Hindu Kush. I mean, where do you go with a guy like that?
Well, the thing that was so intriguing to me about it, David, is that it came out right away and, people are like, oh, they're releasing evidence and, this is a breakthrough. I'm not denying that what this guy is saying could be factually based. It's amazing how it's so difficult to find this right now. This stuff was coming up yesterday. People saw it in the Daily Beast. Alan Parrott Falconer. It was a question to Donald Trump. Here we go. Trump touts Falconer's conspiracy theory. So this was what I suspected would happen with this story from the jump. We see this eccentric guy talking about facts and details surrounding explosive stories, and I wasn't questioning what he was saying about Osama bin Laden being protected by the United States and Iran, about Obama and Biden knowing much more about the destruction of Extortion 17 than what we've been officially told, more to the story of bin Laden's alleged assassination, capture, whatever we want to call it. All of those things are factual. The thing that I was questioning, David, again, goes back to what you've told us about, is this concept of a parallel narrative. We've got a real narrative, which is that a traitor was the president of the United States, Barack Obama, and that he did certain things, funding the Muslim Brotherhood in North Africa, facilitating the destruction of Libya, allowing or causing the destruction of Extortion 17, protecting bin Laden in Iran. All of those things I believe are true. But by bringing them out in this way, with this extremely eccentric character through a person who's not a known journalist with any credibility, but rather someone who could easily be assailed as a reality show star, an Instagram model, and a former poker player, this thing is sort of planted on Donald Trump and his supporters in such a way that it can come up on NBC News, a mainstream thing, and be immediately dismissed as conspiracy theory, and therefore anyone and anything supporting it, including the president, is mocked.
Yeah, and the momentum is building, and I believe that the Republic is in great danger on November the 3rd. If this, could you switch to the cover collage that we discussed, because maybe I could just introduce some concepts there that may clarify that. But I mean, if you look at this guy with the beard and the falcon, that to me is pure theater.
Absolutely. Give me a moment to bring up that collage for your screen share, David, but the audience is going to be able to see it right now. This is a collage that I created. You were telling me about this British Columbia River Rock casino, right?
Yeah, so the model that I think they're using, and you use the phrase, the title, how the cyberspace offers incredible flexibility to organize crime. Now, in order to get to that position, which is actually a serious threat to the survival of the Republic on November the 3rd, I believe you need to test the concepts that are available. So this wonderful collage that you have, up there in the top right, you have that amazing mural right on the edge of the downtown east side in the vicinity of Starnet Communications. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a classic example of the three forms of cyber attack that I believe we, the people, are being subjected to through organized crime. The first being, spot fix junkets. Now, Starnet Communication, interestingly, it was launched in 1996, I believe, and it was raided on August the 20th, 1999, and it was accused of hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming into 60 countries with a market cap that was nearing $1 billion.
Yes.
Now, just think what that implies. That means to make hardcore child pornography, you're doing incredibly disgusting things to children, right? And those children, whether they're bought or sold or captured or abducted, are victims, of course. Now, when they are used as bait to attract other people who might go into one of the basement studios at Starnet Communications in the belief that they're going to be making, I don't know, a sex movie or something like that with adults, the moment the child is on the scene and you have non-consensual activities with victims, you become a victim in a very interesting way as well. The child has obviously been damaged, maybe beyond repair, and ultimately killed, but you have been filmed actually doing that. Now, how many people went into the studios on Starnet Communication during the period between 1996 and 20th of August 1999 with the raid and subsequently were extorted or blackmailed because of what they'd done. Maybe they were drugged, maybe they were drunk. We don't know the context. But this was an incredibly efficient and dangerous operation that proved the concept, in my opinion, of basically spot fixed junkets where you might be betting in some Macau casino on how long it will take the child to die, right? Or compromised nodes where the individual that is in the studio at Starnet Communications maybe is a friend of a couple of people who are roommates.
But wait, let me back you up, because you're dropping some things on people that if they weren't watching last week, they might not immediately recognize. These compromised nodes, David, I think we definitely want to fill everybody in on exactly what that is and where we got that from. That was Cameron Ortis in his thesis, his PhD thesis. And Cameron Ortis, let's just give everyone a quick background, because this is really important, not just for prosecution of international organized crime that in this case is going up to the presidential level, both in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere, but also, David, in these parallel narratives that you and I are being drawn into. Give us just a quick background on Cameron Ortis, Phantom Secure, and all that stuff.
Okay, Cameron Ortis was arrested as director of the RCMP intelligence division. And when people or the police raided his home, they found 30 computers, apparently programmed so if you didn't get the password right, it would erase its own database. So going back to the thesis, which I think he defended up at UBC in 2006, this is bowing to Quirinus, who's a Roman god or cult figure in the early days of the Roman Empire, basically an authority figure, and basically describing cybersecurity in compromised nodes in East Asia. Now, that's really interesting. I'd never heard of the phrase compromised nodes. And then I started thinking about it, and I'm wondering, what way or how do you most easily compromise a node, which might be a human being, or it might be a club, or it might be a hotel, or it might be a group of people, it might even be a political party? Well, there's very standard techniques used by British intelligence, and I guess intelligence around the world, known as the honeypot. So if you can get one or two people or friends caught in a compromised node, which might be a honeypot involving the abuse of children, you probably got them for life. So I'm very interested in, the term used by Cameron Ortis and his subsequent narrative, which describes his career to an incredibly powerful position, and from the point of view of the survival of the Five Eyes countries, a dangerous position, because he becomes, through Justin Trudeau and Bob Paulson, the director of intelligence, for the first civilian director of intelligence for the RCMP. And he would have had access to all of the operations, the most secret operations involving the Five Eyes country. So this guy has taken with him, he's in jail right now, and he hasn't been prosecuted, he hasn't been brought to trial, there's a secrecy act all over the place. But what was the role of the police who took away the evidence from his home? And what was the role of the 100 to 150 law enforcement officers that took away all of the evidence of Starnet's hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming in 60 countries? I think they all represent, Jason, compromised nodes that have taken the evidence away that prevents the public from understanding the much deeper threat, which I would say is an existential threat to the survival of the Republic. Over to you.
Yeah. And David, you've spoken with us so much about how the BBC has acted as a conduit for these sort of artificial reality news items, and the compromised nodes, the Starnet communications links, all of these things, child pornography, abduction, pedophilia. It was really interesting that last night during the presidential town hall, what is her name, Savannah Guthrie, asked Donald Trump specifically about this piece of news that he tweeted. He retweeted a link to this Alan Parrott Benghazi story, and Savannah Guthrie was asking Trump, why he was retweeting a conspiracy theory. She tried to characterize this QAnon phenomenon as, the funny thing is the way she spoke about it, to me, made her look ridiculous because, without defining what QAnon may or may not be, Shannon Guthrie said it was an internet conspiracy theory about a satanic pedophile ring, and that the researchers involved with QAnon wanted to bring down a satanic pedophile ring. Now, if what Savannah Guthrie is saying about QAnon is correct, how is that bad? Wouldn't we want to bring a satanic pedophile ring to justice? And isn't it known that people like Jeffrey Epstein and Jimmy Savile and many others have in fact engaged in pedophilia? And whether or not it's satanic is sort of peripheral. The fact that these people are trafficking in and raping young children seems like it should be a very high priority, not something to be mocked by some dope from NBC. What do you think about all that?
Well, absolutely. So let's say they release the idea that there is a satanic pedophile network operating around the world, when the fact is there is a pedophile network, but it's not satanic, if you see what I mean. So the public,
whether it is or not.
Well, yeah, satanic is irrelevant, right? So let's look for a real pedophile ring in the world and see if there are any compromised nodes associated with it. And lo and behold, we find that the roommate, Justin Trudeau, and Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, who were roommates, Justin Trudeau would go on to become the Prime Minister of Canada, obviously the son of a previous Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and Christopher Charles Ingvaldson would be arrested, charged, ultimately convicted and jailed for directing an international pedophile ring. So you see how the news has moved away from the real narrative of the Prime Minister of Canada being best friends and a roommate of Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, and therefore involved either as an accessory or an unwitting associate or accomplice of a real international pedophile ring. But now none of us are talking about Christopher, well, we are, you and I are, as a compromised node. Just think of what you could do if you've compromised, and I'm not saying under what circumstances he was compromised, but the Prime Minister of Canada is the best friends with someone who's been to jail for directing an international pedophile ring. And for me, that's a classic example of a compromised node. Because
there's something else about it, David. Because this article from the CBC is telling us that Ingvaldson was involved in a Facebook child porn ring. So he's publishing child pornography on Facebook, right?
And that's another reason why Facebook might have gone after you, because what you and I are doing, I think very successfully, and with your other guests, we are not being diverted, right? We are focused, and I believe like lasers. And at the end of this part of the show, I want to give the audience two names, and we can talk about that in the Patreon part of the show, that I believe fall into this category of expert victim witnesses. That is to say, they know what's going on, right? But in this mesh of complexity, they don't know who to go to and how to explain it. And the only avenue, I think, for those kind of people, expert victim witnesses, and I've got two names for you, is to appear in the court of public opinion, which is your show, because we don't need to take an expert victim witness into the courts to try and get the judges or the jury or the police to listen sympathetically. We just have to get them in either listening or participating in your show. So you've got a heavy duty, but you're doing it magnificently, if I may say so.
Thank you, David. But the court of public opinion, it extends beyond just this show. I think it is all of social media, which you and I are participants in. But it's very interesting that Ingvaldson is able to access and traffic in child pornography on Facebook. But as you've pointed out, you and I publish videos exploring these things in part on Facebook and elsewhere. And 2 weeks ago, or a little more than a week ago, Crowdsource The Truth was removed from Facebook. And just yesterday, when actual evidence of Hunter Biden smoking crack, sending text messages about receiving money from China, giving half of it to Joe Biden, Facebook completely censored the New York Post. Now, I don't like the New York Post, but as far as I know, they're not publishing child pornography. But Facebook is very quick to shut down this news, I think it's real news, about Hunter Biden. And they did not seem to be so quick to shut down child pornography from the roommate of Justin Trudeau. What do you think of that, David?
Well, actually, and again, because, this part of the show, we've got to cover a lot of ground. Can we just get back to the collage, the big picture? Because I'd like to, if I may, race through that and pick out the main characters. Now, the guy who's real, he's dead. Now, I died at 91 in the foreground. His name is, I don't know if I get the pronunciation right, Cheng Yu-tung.
Yes.
Right? And he's a billionaire. He was Chinese born. He fled the Japanese invasion and immigrated into Hong Kong and ultimately became a very powerful billionaire. And he has interests with Stanley Ho and various other people in casinos and export, import, and so on. Now, the word nexus, which Cameron Ortis uses in his PhD thesis, has been applied to this guy, Cheng Yu-tung, because it is said that he is at the nexus of gambling, casinos, organized crime, etc., etc. Now, being at the nexus doesn't make you guilty of anything. But what I think is happening when you are at the nexus, you're in great danger of becoming what I've called an expert victim witness. That is to say, you're aware of bad things going on, but you're trapped in a web, where this guy's perhaps wealth, multiple billions of dollars, is contingent on him keeping his mouth shut when he witnesses something and opening his mouth when he doesn't witness something, but he wants to put someone in a very difficult situation. So this, to me, is what Cameron J. Ortis is describing. He's actually describing an existing model for criminal organizations that took root in Vancouver, perhaps in the 1990s. I mean, it's much older, but in its modern form, in its cyber form, it was produced and tested and perfected at Starnet Communications. That is to say, building compromised nodes by inviting people to attend sexual filmmaking in the basement at 425 Carroll Street, and then blackmailing them. So I don't say this gentleman, 91 years old, who died, I think, in 2016, is guilty of anything. All I'm saying is he's at the Cameron Ortis nexus, and I would think he was under enormous pressure during his career in Hong Kong, coming from various parties that were expert in the administration of spot fix junkets. Now, what is a spot fix junket? That, for example, might be a junket room in the MGM Mandalay Bay Hotel, right, where people, high flyers, big gamblers, drop a $500,000 on a chip or whatever it is, can bet on the body count at the Harvest Festival. Now, that might sound a little cynical, but I can assure you that spot fixing in gambling is very old, and it goes back to, for example, White's Club in London in the 18th century, where a couple of aristocrats bet against how long their particular drop, their raindrop, would take to get to the bottom of a windowsill at White's Club. And during the French Revolution, they were betting on, I don't know, as best of my knowledge, what day Louis the
But David,
15th
before we go into too much history, because people can look that up and we've spoken about it many times, definitely the death pool betting has happened historically. Spot fixing is very important in a lot of different types of gambling events. You've told us many times about Howard Lutnick's patent for wagering, interactive real-time wagering on event outcomes. There's someone else in this collage who may represent a compromised node. And I've pictured him here right next to Hillary Clinton, who's using a BlackBerry. And we also forgot to tell people about Cameron Ortis and his involvement with Phantom Secure, which was hardware modifying BlackBerries that you and I have presented a lot of evidence and information that I believe supports the hypothesis that Hillary Clinton was using a Phantom Secure BlackBerry for reasons that remain unknown because we haven't seen her emails. But I want to talk for a minute, David, about Barry Diller, because he is very important in this story. We've spoken about how his Interactive Corporation owns the Daily Beast and Vimeo. And again, this story about Alan Parrott dealing with all these very important things that are now making their way into the presidential town hall, this was originally published in the Daily Beast, one of the companies owned by Barry Diller's IAC. Now, it was just recently reported August of 2020, IAC, Barry Diller, joined the board of MGM Grand. And this Bloomberg article tells us that it was his particular interest in their online gaming technology that in part caused him to want to do that. And so the thing I want people to consider, David, is you and I have spoken about how when this raid on StarNet Communications took place, the equipment was taken out of there. We don't know where it went. We don't know if those guys wearing the FBI jackets and the CIA jackets were real or actors. And we've speculated that it's gone onto various jets. Now, the thing I want people to contemplate, if you own Vimeo and you own Tinder and you own MGM online gaming technology or have access to it, don't you have all the components that you need to recreate whatever it is that Jeffrey Epstein was doing to compromise these various nodes? And when things like Gawker produce articles telling us about Barry Diller's sexy all-boy Thanksgiving on his private island, doesn't this start to sound like a pattern, David?
Oh, absolutely. So I believe we had thought that they might be insider trading on the stock markets. I now prefer, just after recent conversations with you, the possibility that they moved the spot fixed junket concepts onto the aircraft, right, that were flown, for example, by Jeffrey Epstein. That is to say, they could bet while they're actually flying through the air on events on the ground. I don't know, for example, the Harvest Festival killings with MGM Mandalay Bay Hotel. So this technology, having been proved in Vancouver, I think it gave rise to this limited hangout that there's a Vancouver model for organized crime and money laundering. I think it went out to Richmond, and I think the more accurate description is the Richmond model, where Phantom Secure headquarters were set up. And I believe actually that Cameron Ortis was either the head, and this would be extraordinary, the RCMP head of intelligence directing Phantom Secure. Right?
I agree with you.
Now, of course, what you've got there is Phantom Secure through the RCMP back door now has access to Five Eyes intelligence, including who is jockeying in position into a controlling position, who might need to be extorted into silence through some kind of parallel narrative attack, which might include Boris Johnson, remember, goes into hospital with COVID-19 and nearly has a brush with a ventilator from which he might have been remotely killed and assassinated. You look at Phantom Secure, facilitated murders and drug smuggling. So you have a 20,000 member elite criminal organization using modified BlackBerrys of the type that we might very legitimately assume as used by Hillary Clinton during the Benghazi attack, to direct the Benghazi attack to achieve certain results.
And while you're on that, David, I want to point out to our audience that if they recall, when I was doing work with George Webb, who is a definite social engineer, a definite liar, and has tried to trick me and viewers repeatedly, he was insistent that Imran Awan was the mastermind of hacking BlackBerries. All attention was focused on him. And remember what happened to him. He was caught at the airport by the FBI, charged with financial crimes, and then in court, as a plea bargain to get out of this comparatively small infraction of bank fraud, he accepted a plea deal that absolved him of any responsibility for any crime whatsoever. And when I look at people like Hillary Clinton and Barry Diller and so many of these people that we're talking about and suspecting of wrongdoing, it seems that they're all involved with these 501c3 tax-exempt corporations. David, it's almost as if they have these financial crimes out in front of them so that if they ever do end up in court, they could be charged with tax fraud rather than treason or human trafficking or some of these truly horrendous crimes, and they could just make a plea deal based on, paying some excise tax and be all right. So I just want to be clear. We're not accusing this guy, Alan Parrott, of lying. We're not accusing him of having incorrect or false information. What I suspect is happening is that he is somehow involved, and he could be involved as a victim in a social engineering play that's designed to distract people away from truly damaging information about Hunter Biden and some of these other people that we're talking about, to turn it all into what the mainstream news can characterize as a QAnon conspiracy theory and then claim it's been debunked. What do you think of that?
Oh, absolutely. So in order to do that successfully, and I first encountered this idea of tracking characters to understand narratives at that IJCAI conference in 1981, you need to be able to track these people to determine whether they're just victims, like they get murdered, like Peter J. Gansey, the fire chief of New York who was killed on 9/11, or it's a different kind of victim where maybe this guy, Mr. Parrott, is a victim because he may be an extremely nice individual. He may be very sharp, but he's only presented with those parts of a fake narrative that he needs to turn it around, come up with what sounds like an outlandish theory, and then get Donald Trump to bite into it and discredit Donald Trump.
But isn't it also possible, David, that he has real information that now malicious actors are attempting to conflate with a false narrative to make it appear that his real and dangerous information is also fake?
Yes. So at the end of the day, people like you and myself and your fellow guests, I think what we're trying to offer to the public are real characters and real narratives. What we're being assaulted by, and they, the public, is they've got the ability to switch a fake character into a real narrative, a real character into a fake narrative, and even a fake character and a fake narrative, and bamboozle the public and take the court of public opinion away from reality. And in this picture, this collage, you've magnificently represented how easy it is, I think, to get the public to move in the wrong direction. And that, I think, translates into a threat to the Republic on November the 3rd. So we look at Hillary Clinton holding this BlackBerry. Didn't you tell me that she was buying the BlackBerries at eBay?
That was reported widely in the news.
All right. So if Phantom Secure in Richmond, BC is modifying BlackBerries, why wouldn't they send them out and make sure that certain people and not others can buy a modified BlackBerry and join an elite criminal group, 20,000 strong, which is able to organize hits anywhere in the world? And basically, I would say, arrange a hit where insiders in the junket rooms, maybe in Macau, maybe in the River Rock Casino in Richmond, or maybe in the MGM Mandalay Bay Hotel, they have inside information where, let me just say, for example, certain people within the Mandalay Bay Hotel, security and everyone else, are told there will be, 51 dead during
59.
an attack? 59. Where you predict in advance how many people are going to die. Now, actually, with the BBC having a monopoly ability to generate these these parallel narratives, I think they rely on the BBC through a piece of technology we can talk about if you choose, but we've covered it previously. I think they rely on the BBC to be the umpire of any dispute by a junket room anywhere in the world. If, for example, they've been placing bets on the number of people who are going to die at the Harvest Festival, which you're telling me is 59.
Right. There's another important thing I want to talk about, David. You're referring, of course, to this spoken text display apparatus for the generation of television signals, which we've pointed out some of the strange language involved in describing that thing. But, I love it when this happens, David. As we're talking, I'm sort of discovering on the fly this article about Hillary Clinton using the BlackBerries purchased on eBay, which the premise makes absolutely no sense. Why would a wealthy woman like Hillary Clinton, particularly in the position of Secretary of State, want a used BlackBerry? That makes no sense to me outside of the explanation that we've offered, which is, informed by my experience in modifying Panasonic video cameras to make them into 3D cameras, my company 21st Century 3D developed an integrated circuit that linked this particular model of Panasonic camera. Two of them could be linked together. And it was very difficult to develop that circuit when Panasonic came out with newer models. Our technology no longer worked. I suspect something similar might be going on with Phantom Secure, where perhaps they made a big effort to develop some encryption circuit, some chip, some little system on a chip, and it integrates with some models of Blackberries, but perhaps BlackBerry, in the advancing technology of their own devices, made a newer one that no longer worked, and that this would have caused Hillary Clinton to have to buy old ones on eBay. It's also interesting to note that the New York Post is the same publication that put out all this information about Hunter Biden that's been blocked from Facebook. It's also interesting to note that the New York Post is owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, which also owns Fox News, and of course, our non-friend, Barry Diller, was one of the founders of News Corp. So it's strange, David. I wonder, is this like warring billionaires putting out news against each other? I don't understand exactly what's going on there, but one thing we forgot to mention is that Crunchbase had reported that Barry Diller and his IAC bought something called StarNet Interactive. So we're not pulling at strings here. There seem to be remarkable connections between all of these people and all of these things.
Well, I'd like to sort of suggest that the Vancouver model of organized crime and money laundering is a limited hangout. And in fact, it's the Richmond, BC model of money laundering and organized crime hits and so on. And now what you've just described, I believe, is actually a challenge for a world-class systems integrator, right? That is to say, to take a Blackley and its code, et cetera, and clip that into other kinds of technology like the Federal Bridge. It requires a very sophisticated systems integrator, such as Maxar Technologies of Richmond, British Columbia, right? And Maxar Technologies, I believe, built the integration systems that allow organized crimes to hack into through, let's say, a compromised node into a government network, let's say one of the Five Eyes countries, and arrange a series of events that would support a spot fixed Deadpool operation in junket rooms around the world, such as, let's say, New Zealand, right? Although you have this guy who suddenly decides to shoot up a mosque. You've done some clips, I think, that suggest there isn't any blood. The most important thing that I think comes out of that is that the BBC has the authority to declare, without evidence, how many people died in the mosque shooting in Christchurch. So the role of the BBC through that technology, which I believe has been integrated with other technologies by Maxar, is the ability to act as an umpire on spot fixed junkets, which might include, for example, how long before the judge stays your trial, with the,
The Emmys.
Yes, the Emmys, or the hoax in Charleston Harbor, where you get involved. There's all kinds of opportunities to bet on events which basically limit your ability to continue to function as crowdsource the truth in an effective way. So these people have what I would describe as a zero latency opportunity to spot fix an event before it happens and then signal to the victims, you're about to see 343 dead firefighters in one day. Now, if I'm the fire chief, Peter Gansey, right, or a senior officer in the fire department of New York, and I'm told at the beginning of the day, that there's going to be 343 fatalities. First of all, I'm under enormous pressure because I've got teams of men and women, I suppose, going into the two towers, right? And then Tower 1 comes down and I get told, well, that's half of the guys, right? And then there's going to be another. So it adds up to a total of 343. What could be more terrifying than that? Over to you.
Well, there's another component of what we're talking about, David, because you had brought up this River Rock casino and how there was some local reporting about how massive money laundering was going on there. And the organized crime elements from China, the triads, were potentially becoming involved in gambling and online, a variety of different criminal activities there in British Columbia. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. This comes back to Mr. Cheng Yu Tung, right, who's a billionaire, and he's at a nexus, apparently, of organized crime and gambling. That doesn't make him a criminal, but it makes him exposed to extreme pressure, which I think is described in this article I'm looking at, where there were triad attacks on his property, right? Multiple attacks. Now, that to me is sending a signal either to him, I don't know what the date of this is, or to his family, not to step out of line. So I believe these people, what was the date of there? I can't
10
see.
years.
Well, more than 10 years old, yeah. He died in 2016, so he was alive then, right? Now, he is therefore sitting up there. He's a billionaire. He would obviously have very close contacts to the links between Hong Kong, Huawei, and Nortel. And obviously, if he can be placed in a compromised node, and heaven knows there must be 50 different ways where you might fall into such a node, you can then be influenced into doing something you really don't want to do to protect your your fortune or the family wealth and so on. So this cyber attack, and I call it a tri-cyber attack because, like I said, I think there are three ways of doing it, can extort incredible concessions from legitimate leaders of the Five Eyes countries, including Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, whose name escapes me for the moment, Australia.
Jenica something?
Yeah, and Donald Trump himself. So Donald Trump, or these people may say one thing because they've been told to say it or they've been prepped by it. Let's say Donald Trump, as I understand it, is an aficionado of Twitter. Where's he getting the information that he relays into the wider Twitter community? Maybe he's set up with this Falconer parrot or parroting Falconer or whatever it is. I don't mean the guy any harm, or I don't mean to insult him, but he looks to me like incredibly naive, and he was generating non-forensic information in that interview. Over to you.
Well, there's one other thing I want to add because, there's been a lot of reporting in the Canadian press about potential money laundering through this, is it called River Rock Casino? It was
Yes.
$2 billion. Yeah. They were saying it could have been more than $2 billion. And, the term money laundering, David, I mean, again, it's a broad term that I certainly don't fully understand. I think a lot of people don't fully understand it. Something I've observed with all the social engineers that have been hassling you and I nonstop is that in addition to money laundering, there seems to be a strong effort to do payment laundering so that someone receives a payment, but the person who paid them or what it is that they were paid for is really obscured, hidden even, so that this sort of thing just can't come out in a trial. Obviously, if it's difficult to resolve what's going on, it's even more difficult to prosecute somebody for doing it. And I agree with you, David. We're not accusing anyone of anything. We're just pointing out some interesting coincidences. And one other interesting coincidence about this piece of news that was retweeted by Donald Trump and became a sore spot in his conversation with Savannah Guthrie last night at the presidential town hall. He's getting that information from Alan Parrott, and actually, most of it was really blasted out on the internet by this woman, Anna Kate. Now, Anna Kate has held a lot of other jobs. One of the things that she did is she was a professional poker player. She's tracked by the Hendon mob. And here it says that she's American, but I'm pretty sure that she is of Russian descent. And I don't hold that against her, but they're talking about her earnings here, $12,811. Now, I want to propose the possibility, David. I'm sure you've been into a casino. I've been into a casino. They're big places. You sit down at the poker table. That's a bit of a unique game in the casino. But conceivably, someone could walk into a big casino like Mandalay Bay or MGM Grand. And let's say you, David, want to pay me $12,000 but have nobody know that you're doing that. Is it conceivable that you could go to the craps table, go to the roulette table, go to the blackjack table, and lose $12,000 into the casino, while I simultaneously sit down at the poker table, the blackjack table, some slot machine, and magically $12,000, by sheer luck, is paid out to me. It would appear that I've just won this money in some game of chance, but wouldn't that be a very sophisticated way to hide a payment? And didn't Maria tell us, David, that when she was at StarNet Communications, she observed in their online gambling operation that there was actually a human operator sitting in between the gaming transactions, manipulating the results?
Absolutely. So that's the way you launder the money and the payments for anything up to murder for hire or planting a fake story. So what we've got here is this very sophisticated technical operation. It's not just a criminal organization where someone abducts a child from the downtown east side with the mother and takes them to a studio at the bottom of, underneath the 425 Carroll Street. Above them are opportunities, for example, for placing bets on how long it takes for the woman to die or the child to die. So it's really sinister. And you've got this combination. It's a nexus between high tech, which I can call the tri-cyber attacks, and organized crime that is into kneecapping or extortion, right? So we have, I believe, right now, we got about two people, and I in the closing stages of this part of the show, I want to identify them, but just to understand what I believe these two individuals can do. I believe they're classic examples of expert victim witnesses. That is to say, they have the knowledge to recognize what is going on, but they're enmeshed in multiple networks, you can call them sandboxes or whatever, with this degree of fraud, where they don't know where to turn. They want to signal something in a certain way, but they can't communicate it successfully because of the web of social networks surrounding them that doesn't let the message out. So if I may, I'd like to give you two names, right? And the listeners' two names before we go into the next part of the show. The first name, which many people will not have heard, is a man, Professor Alfred Hermida, right? And Professor Alfred Hermida is the director of the School of Journalism up at UBC. And remember that Cameron Ortis, that's him. So there's a very nice Chan Center there, which I think seats 1,200 people, that I would like to see do a documentary, but I digress. So Professor Hermida has a most interesting career because he founded the BBC online news desk in 1997. And that facility or that service collected 4 BAFTA awards for 1998, 1999, 2000, and 2001.
And for people who don't know, David, the BAFTA is the British equivalent of an Academy Award, which is in many ways remarkably similar to an Emmy.
Right. And it's one way of awarding people who get turned on by applause or whatever it is. In the case of the Emmys, I believe you could ultimately become a much bigger box office attraction if you got an Emmy than if you haven't. But, back to Professor Hermida. I've sent a couple of messages through his email account. I've tried the telephone and not got it. But I want people to think about what Professor Hermida would have witnessed when he was the editor of the BBC online news desk, which I believe was one of the first in the world. And what's very important is the BBC online news desk has the ability to reach an audience, a weekly audience of 500 million people in 50 languages. I think we need to bear that in mind. What I want to ask, and hopefully you want to ask Hermida, is how do you process the data? Hermida talks a lot about data journalism. How do you process the data coming from a crime scene, like the bombing of the East African embassies, or the bombing of the USS Cole, or the demolition of Building Number 7? So that you're obliged to withhold some information and release others. Now, what happens when Jane Stanley was calling in or being interviewed in New York, and she said, we're getting news that the Salomon Brothers building has collapsed? What happens if that technology that we talked about was used to send a signal to initiate a junket room bet? That is to say, they now started a bet on how long it would take for the building actually to come down. I think it came down 15 minutes later. So someone could make a great deal of money of scooping the pot because they could have been told at what time the demolition crew will bring that building down. And that, I think, is a classic example where Professor Hermida could help us understand, and I start from the position he is most likely to have been an expert victim witness. That is to say, he saw something going on. He knew it was wrong, like the attack on the East African embassies, but he didn't know where to turn to because the people who are organizing or synchronizing the attack are right at the top of the Five Eyes countries or embedded through corrupted or compromised nodes within the government of Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Over to you.
Yeah, we're getting close to the end of our hour here, David, and we've got a lot of comments coming in. I want to thank everybody who's watching us. A couple things I want to make clear for everyone, David, because most people who watch us on Fridays are well aware that you and I do a sponsor-exclusive program that's going to begin in just about 5 to 10 minutes on Patreon and subscribestar.com on Subscribestar, David, people can join you at subscribestar.com/reverse-CSI or patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards. They're also going to be able to watch our show on subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Now, one of the things that's very interesting is that simultaneous with the Daily Beast releasing this article about the Falconer, which was intended clearly to discredit him, they also shut down the Vimeo channel, the entire Crowdsource the Truth Vimeo channel, which took our whole library offline temporarily, our sponsor-exclusive library. It's going to be coming back in just a couple of days. I've been building a bespoke data server that's going to carry all of the Crowdsource the Truth sponsor exclusive videos. That'll be there soon. We do have an alternate account that's going to have today's live show on there, so people will be able to see the show if they become sponsors on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, subscribestar.com/reverse-CSI, or subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. So I want to reassure people that they will be able to see the show, and I want to thank all of the sponsors that make the show possible. But it's just so coincidental to me, David, that it seems like we've got this social engineering operation surrounding the very important evidence that Alan Parrott and people like him have referred to, other people who are aware of things that were going on in Iraq and things happening under the Obama and Bush administrations. But it seems like IAC doesn't want our information to be on the internet, while professional poker players are able to tweet ad nauseum about this stuff. So many people have been purged from the internet, but not that group. It's very curious. But David, we'll continue the conversation about this and other topics in just a few minutes when people join us on Subscribestar and Patreon. Yes.
Jason, sorry to interrupt. I just want to give you the name of my second expert
yes.
Victim, underlying victim, expert victim witness, I believe is Donald Trump. I believe Donald Trump is assailed by criminal organizations that want to amplify some of his, misquotes or whatever it was, and basically ensure that he doesn't get the intelligence necessary to take this criminal organization in cybersecurity down. Over to you.
I agree with you, David. And, some, feisty moron on Periscope earlier jumped to the conclusion and tried to put some words into my mouth that I did not say. I do not assume that President Trump is stupid. I support President Trump, and although he sometimes says and does things that I don't agree with, I want him to win. What I'm saying is even the smartest among us can be deceived. And I want people to be very cautious of this deception. There's a number of things about the presentation of the information from Mr. Parrott and some of the people who have surrounded him, and particularly the Gold Star families, that cause me to believe that someone is trying to manipulate and take advantage of these people. For all we know, David, Alan Parrott could be a witness victim in the way that you described, but I definitely think the president is the target of this. We're going to talk about it more in less than 5 minutes when we carry on. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you over on Subscribestar and Patreon.